Canon have fully revealed both the EOS R5 and the EOS R6. We've got all the spec, everything we want to know. You can actually watch our first look videos. I'll pop a link down in the description if you want to go check those out. But what's the difference between these two cameras? The EOS R5 looks super impressive. It's getting all the headlines with its 8K RAW and all that kind of stuff. But the EOS R6 is also a very impressive camera. It actually sounds like the kind of camera a lot of us have been waiting for since the EOS R was launched. So let's dive into what are the actual differences between these cameras, and maybe that'll help you decide which one might be for you. So first things first, let's talk about the imagery of the cameras. And let's start off with the sensor. Now here, there's quite a clear difference between the cameras. The EOS R5 has a 45 megapixel sensor, while the EOS R6 has a 20.1 megapixel sensor. Although it is worth noting that R6 has the new 2-point low pass filter, which gives it a higher resolution and better quality. So even though it is a lower megapixel count, it should be a really, really good quality. Now that also should theoretically help with low light performance as well. Both of these cameras are designed to work really well for low light, much like the EOS R did, but the R6 might just have the advantage there. We'll have to wait until the full review to properly check that out. But certainly in terms of ISO performance and ISO range, the R5 is ISO 100 to 51,200, whereas the R6 is 100 to 102,400. And of course that can be expanded as well. So you can see from the ISO range that the R6 has a much larger ISO range there. That's not the only thing that's going to help with low light though. Of course, there is in-body image stabilization in both of these cameras, and both cameras have up to 8 stops. So no real advantage there, but really impressive with both cameras. They both really excel with that. That's whether you're shooting low light and you want to use a slower shutter speed while shooting handheld, or whether you're shooting handheld video as well. Both of those things are going to be massively affected by the very impressive in-body image stabilization. There's also no real difference in terms of speed. Both cameras are able to shoot 12 frames a second with a mechanical shutter and 20 frames a second with the electronic shutter. So really quite nice and fast. In terms of autofocus, they're very, very similar as well. They've both got the dual pixel CMOS AF. They've both got IAF for both humans and animals, and the main difference comes in with how low it can focus down to, with the R5 being able to autofocus down to -6 EV and the R6 down to -6.5 EV, which really is very, very low light. Now let's move on and talk about video. And this is a point where there really is quite a big difference between the two cameras. I think they actually both offer some really good stuff to videographers, but the R5 obviously takes away all those headlines with its incredible stuff. So let's get into it. So maximum resolution. So the R5 obviously wins this one, 8K up to 30 frames a second, whereas of course the R6 is doing 4K, which is no problem. 4K is still good, but 8K, that is really, really nice. The R5 can also do 4K DCI or UHD, whereas of course the R6 is just 4K UHD only. Now in terms of bitrate as well, the R5 is shooting 8K RAW, so full 12-bit RAW, whereas of course the R6 is 10-bit 422. Still very respectable, but it's difficult to beat RAW, isn't it? And in terms of high frame rates as well, of course we've got the R5 doing 4K up to 120 frames a second, whereas of course the R6 is doing 4K up to 60 frames a second, so still very respectable, and then full HD up to 120 frames a second. So in that sense, the R6 is a little bit more what we're used to, but certainly 4K 60 is really, really good. But if you really want to step it up to that really high-end kind of stuff, 4K 120, 8K RAW, that's a really cool thing to have in a camera for a videographer. Now both cameras do have Canon log in the camera as well, and they're able to do time lapse and things like that, although of course the R5 can do an 8K time lapse, whereas the R6 is a 4K time lapse. Now what about the actual body of the camera? So the viewfinder, the screen, the actual button placement and stuff like that. Well, they're very, very similar. The actual bodies are very, very similar to hold and to use, and ergonomically, they're extremely similar. Of course, the R5 has that little screen on the top for you to look at for the actual controls, whereas the R6 doesn't have that. But otherwise, the R5 has a 5.76 million dot viewfinder running it up to 120 frames a second. So very nice and high res and very smooth as well. The R6 is a little bit lower res at 3.69 million dots, but that's also up to 120 frames a second, so nice and smooth. And 3.69 million dots is certainly not bad, it's just that the R5 does have that slightly higher res. Similar situation with the flip out touchscreen as well, so both cameras have a flip out touchscreen, but the R5 is running at 2.1 million dots, whereas the R6 is $1.62 million. Something you'd probably expect from the different price ranges these cameras are falling into. Now, storage is an area that I think is interesting with both the cameras because I think this actually plays into what you want from the camera. So the R5 is using CF Express. They've both got dual card slots, but CF Express in the R5 and SD cards in the R6. Now that's important because most of us, I mean, imagine all of us will already have SD cards we can use with the R6, whereas a lot of us will have to get a CF Express card for the R5. And that is not always necessarily the cheapest thing to buy. They're not as cheap as SD cards, for example. The reason you're using CF Express cards with the R5 is, of course, you're shooting 8K RAW. That's a huge amount of information to be actually recording, and 4K 120 is just a lot of information to take in, whereas of course on the R6, because it's a little slower frame rate, 4K 60, or of course Full HD 120, it's just a little bit easier to put that onto an SD card. They also both take the same battery, the new LPE6NH, and of course they can take the old batteries as well. So for me, the difference between these cameras comes down to actually what you want to use them for and what you're hoping to get out of them. If you're a really high-end pro videographer, or even just a pro videographer who really likes to get kind of the best out of their videos and things like that, the R5 is going to allow you to do that. 8K RAW gives you so many options for what you want to get. 4K 120 is going to look fantastic. Whereas on the R6, you've still got some really good videography options like 4K 60, Full HD 120, 422 10-bit. It's just not quite as high end as the R5. Now that would depend what you want to make, what you want to get out of it, and what ultimately you're delivering. Is this for yourself? Are you just making things for fun or for a hobby or just for yourself? Or are you making this for clients and things like that? And then what do you need to be able to provide? What do you need from your camera to be able to get those higher paying jobs and those higher level jobs? Similarly with the resolution and stuff like that, what kind of photos do you like to take? Because if it's low light, the R6 is probably going to have a slight advantage. You know, if it's just for yourself, if it's just for kind of fun, the R6 might be the one. But if you want to have those higher resolution images, if you like to be able to crop in post, which I do, I really like being able to do that, I like being able to reframe things, the R5 is going to let you do that with 45 megapixels, a little bit like with the 8K. You can shoot a bit wider with video and crop in, so you can actually get more detail in the shot and decide exactly how you want to frame it later, adding zooms and things like that. Both cameras have got that incredible image stabilization, they're nice and fast, they're both really good to shoot with. It just depends what you want from the camera at the end of the day. Now, if you have any questions about either camera, make sure to pop it down in the comments below. Like I said before, you can watch our full first look videos on both these cameras down in the description. I'll pop the links down there so you can check them out entirely. You can also go to our website where you can check out both these cameras, the full spec, everything you want to know. So you can check that out over there. I will, of course, see you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.